It's been a while since I've had an excuse to talk Tolkien, and recently I felt prompted to do so as I encountered a criticism of Peter Jackson's film trilogy adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings novels, and I felt that this was the perfect opportunity for some reflection on how far we've come. Perhaps the oldest video essay about a media property that I have published online is a reflection on and implicit defense of Peter Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy adaptation. In that video, I talk about my history with the Lord of the Rings adaptations and the original films, but to play catch-up here, when I was 7 years old, I checked out an interesting-looking book from my grade school library. This is partly why I'm such an avid defender of having more mature texts with higher reading levels in grade schools, because reading material like that, even darker material like Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, was hugely formative for my mindset and ability to approach literature. The book that I checked out on that week turned out to be all 3 Lord of the Rings books published as a single extended book, and although my school only allowed us to keep books checked out for 1 to 2 weeks, I didn't renew it before finishing. Soon I had my own copies of every then-published Tolkien text in his wonderful world of Middle-earth, as well as several audiobooks and radio dramas with public access to any of the ones I was missing in my collection. Thank God for libraries and librarians. The Lord of the Rings might seem like it's a bit above a second grade reading level, but the truth is that when it came to reading, I was a slow learner. I felt like I was behind in my classes and at risk of being held back. That changed when I was able to access fantasy literature. I felt then that I was engaged with some mysterious, magical something outside of my own world and experience. It wasn't escapism, exactly. It was transformation. The real world in which I lived became less mundane. Uruk-hai could besiege my parents' house. Ringwraiths could be lurking in the nearby woods at night. Songs became stories and spells, and trees could whisper if I listened closely. I wasn't transported into a world of Tolkien's making separate from my own. Tolkien literally changed my way of seeing my world as a child. I have always felt that there were a few slight flaws with Tolkien's writing and world, but those were highly situational, as well as being few and far between. For example, orcs speaking in Cockney accents tends to give the impression that lower-class individuals working in industrial society, a society whose aesthetics and values Mordor mimics, are somehow disgusting or less worthy of life. Indeed, Tolkien himself is sometimes said to have regretted his characterizations of the orcs, and there seems to be some implicit suggestion that they are not intrinsically or inevitably evil. Perhaps we might wistfully imagine, free from the influence of the enemy, orcs could grow and flourish as groups, cultures, and individuals. Maybe. Some have said the orcs are racial caricatures, and I think this is best evidenced by extra-textual comments by Tolkien on the design of the orcs and the connotation of English class dynamics. However, a real case of odd racial discourse in The Lord of the Rings would be description of, let's say, the Black Trollmen of Khand. Khand is a land to the east of Harad, a kingdom that is itself east of Umbar, which is far south of Gondor's major coastal cities, Peligare and Dol Amroth. In general, people from these southern and eastern lands, in addition to the other peoples such as Southrons and Easterlings, are described humanely in terms of their personhood, but intimidatingly in terms of their appearance, which has a mixed effect. On the one hand, Sam empathizing with how a fallen Haradrim warrior was likely not an evil man humanizes the quote-unquote evil men of The Lord of the Rings. But on the other hand, they are presented in a manner that could be said to be quite Orientalist. These are, as I've said, small flaws that appear few and far between in an otherwise deep and poetic series of novels that are, again, otherwise quite moving and potent. I could come up with more adjectives, but I never do it justice in abstract description. They are some of the finest works of fiction, and fantasy in particular, that I have ever read, but they have received another major piece of criticism. As you might have guessed from the title of this essay, our subject today is the Eagles of Tolkien's world. I will not be belaboring the point over much, as I believe that we have already had enough of an introductory pathos and ethos on my part, so here comes the logos, and it will be appearing in the exploration of 2 questions. Our first question is one that I feel is necessary in the exploration of the eagles as a subject. Why did the giant eagles not simply fly the ring to Mount Doom in Mordor? People who ask this question tend to presume this would save the Fellowship a great deal of grief, not only in terms of losses, but in terms of time. The extra-narrative answer is that otherwise we wouldn't have much of a story on our hands, but that isn't really satisfying and it doesn't actually answer the question. Why, in the context of the narrative, does the council of the wisest people in Middle-earth not simply make this other decision? The books and films actually answer this, believe it or not. In fact, they do it so thoroughly that it's always odd to me that people even ask this question. Starting from Rivendell, if the Fellowship wants to call upon the Eagles, and the Eagles are willing to answer, they have a few options. Of course, the Eagles might not be willing to answer, as they appear in Tolkien's world to serve only Manwë. Gwaihir, their lord, assists Gandalf only out of gratitude for Gandalf's kindness to him, and he does this in multiple instances across multiple books. The Eagles are not beasts of burden and do not obey the whims of men, nor can they bear other free peoples far, so either way, a straight shot from Rivendell to Mordor is out. It seems likely to me that if the giant eagles were willing to fight in not one but two battles in the Third Age, that they might be willing to assist in this regard, so I will be answering this question under what I believe to be a reasonable assessment of their abilities and motives. The first problem a fellowship traveling by eagle would encounter is that they are expected by Saruman and Sauron. The Gap of Rohan is watched, and as we see, so are Caradhras and Moria, in different ways. So going south and then east past Isengard and through Rohan is out, as are going over or under the Misty Mountains. Remember, the point is to save time and lives. So which options remain? Well, the Fellowship could cross over the Misty Mountains farther to the north, mainly, or skirt even farther north around Old Angmar. This is dangerous territory, so as long as we're far enough north to be out of Saruman's range, we'll stick to going as far south as possible. Something not mentioned in any exploration of this issue is something that I've wondered a few times. Why not go directly to the Grey Havens and take an elvish boat south? Staying close to the coastline, the Fellowship could maneuver south and either receive help from the good men of Gondor or otherwise land in Ithilien and make their way to Mordor directly. I would decide against this if I were Gandalf or Aragorn, and for two reasons. First, even the good men of Middle-earth are not to be trusted in matters of the ring. Second, going by sea is inherently treacherous. The Valar and Maiar that govern the sea are not evil, nor are all of them unkind, but they are not reliable shepherds of men and elves, and the ring has a will of its own. Therefore, like Arvedui, the last king of Arnor, the Fellowship's boat would almost certainly be sunk. It is an inherently unreliable, almost suicidal journey with the ring on board. This is all in Tolkien's texts, but the films at least establish with their time constraints that Gondor does not control the seas until Aragorn and the dead seize the ships of the Corsairs, so the Fellowship would still be sailing directly into the enemy's hands. The Eagles, meanwhile, would not be able to sail over water indefinitely, and would therefore be forced to stop in locations that would make them vulnerable, likely especially to Saruman and even the treachery of good men influenced by the ring. Sticking to our northward path, then, we might find that passing through the land of the Beornings provides some risk of contact with men, but in a more limited manner. This still, however, brings the Fellowship directly into contact with the orcs and the Uruk-hai. Both the films and the novels establish this risk. What risk do these enemies pose to the Eagles? Well, at first you might think none. But the Eagles do explicitly state in The Hobbit that they do not fly near Lake Town, because the good men there will still shoot at them. This implies that even the casual interest of non-military archery fire is dangerous to the Eagles. So we can imagine what any large orc command with a competent commander like Ugluk or Grishnak might accomplish. This is, by the way, still a serious risk incurred while following the Anduin River south. The Eagles would have to stop along the way, and they would be espied by Saruman, Sauron, the Ringwraiths, and orcs of all kinds. So they would be followed and met with drawn swords upon their descent. This is far from a foolproof plan. If anything, it's a suicide run. Even if they somehow make it to Mordor, our Fellowship now has to contend with, and the movies explicitly state this, an excess of 10,000 orcs. You don't think 10,000 orcs can shoot down however many eagles, much less the singular eagle carrying the singular ring? Remember, if that one eagle goes down, it's all over. Additionally, because they would be seen, they would not only be intercepted by winged Nazgul and arrow fire, they would again be met upon their descent. It almost feels like a straw man to note that the proponents of this argument often specifically describe dropping the ring into Mount Doom, but the ring, given a will of its own, as well as its increased power near Mount Doom and its small size, should not be treated as a given quantity in the sense that it would simply fall into the crack of doom and be destroyed. It might fall in the wrong spot, for instance, and be retrieved by the enemy. It could also literally choose to slip out of the hand of the bearer before he could drop it, as established by what it does to Gollum. This is all assuming Peter Jackson's visual interpretation of both Orodruin and Sauron are accurate. For all we know, Sauron's eye could be partially metaphorical, and he could emerge from Barad-dûr with fire and sorcery, casting down the eagles. If our heroes land on Mount Doom to fight their way to Sammath-nar, the chambers of fire where they actually have to go to destroy the ring where it was forged, they would be met with said 10,000 orcs and be promptly slaughtered. All of these plans are worse than what the Fellowship actually attempts, which is a plan whose secrecy is key because with that secrecy, Sauron will never anticipate their intent. The second Sauron feels Frodo claim the ring in Sammath-nar, the jig is up, and the ringwraiths speed to his location. The implication is clear. Sauron knows what they're up to. This is a terrible idea on all levels. But that's not the only question we're here to answer today. Are the eagles a deus ex machina? Tolkien may have preferred the term eucatastrophe, referring to a narrative element whereby disaster for the protagonist is averted by a sudden turn of events, but this doesn't change the nature of our question much. A deus ex machina is a narrative device whose Latin meaning is God from the machine, and which refers primarily to the quality of Greek plays whereby a god character would stand above and intervene on the events of a play to determine the outcome. The term is often used as a pejorative in the modern context to imply the author's own will is intervening on the plot to save the day or offer a resolution where it would otherwise be unlikely. The first problem with offering the eagles up as a deus ex machina is, of course, that if you believe the eagles should have flown Frodo to Mordor, first of all, you're wrong, but second of all, you're making any perceived mistake on Tolkien's part even larger with your own contrived reasoning. The eagles, notably, do not win the day for the men of Gondor and Rohan at the Black Gate. Frodo destroying the ring has this effect, not the eagles. The only sense in which the eagles are a deus ex machina is the sense in which they are also eucatastrophic, because they save Frodo and Sam from the fires of Mount Doom and the ruin of Sauron's lands. Importantly, this is actually a context in which the deus ex machina actually functions well and classically, because the eagles literally serve Manwë, who serves Eru Ilúvatar, the one true god of all of Tolkien's world. It is literally divine intervention, in a sense, which is what a proper deus ex machina is meant to be. However, while the deliverance offered to Frodo and Sam might be sudden, it isn't actually a pure contrivance of divine intervention, just a favorable circumstance. One can imagine Manwë nudging the scales just a bit without intervening directly. If you're looking for an answer within Peter Jackson's films exclusively, we're in luck, because Valinor is referenced multiple times in the films. Frodo is told directly in the common tongue about the light of Eärendil, and in Aragorn's elvish speech to the elves led by Haldir at the Battle of Helm's Deep, he says, A Erukin o danno I phelas, a hin a uben tanatha le phelas. Sorry for butchering that, fans of Quenya. I hope you can forgive me. It's not my first language. This is translated by the subtitles as, Show them no mercy, for you shall receive none. But more literally it translates as, and you might have caught this, O children of Eru, show not mercy to them, for no one will show you mercy. That's Eru Ilúvatar name-dropped right there, Erukin. Frodo also calls out to Eärendil when in Shelob's lair, and when he does so, we get a white light visual with a camera angle looking down on Frodo, almost as Eru Ilúvatar might be. Of course, this is also juxtaposed with a reverse shot of Shelob emerging from the darkness, so it serves multiple functions, but the implication is still there. After Frodo exits Shelob's lair, a vision of Galadriel helps him back on his feet, and tells him that this task was appointed to him, which is a phrase that has at this point been repeated in the trilogy. This not only plays off of Sam's subsequent liberation of Frodo from Cirith Ungol, and his subsequent dedication to carrying Frodo, as well as the ring that Frodo carries, but it also implies that despite Frodo volunteering to take the ring to Mordor, there is a higher power selecting him for the task. These are all references to a higher power outside the realms of elves and men, and with a greater mysterious influence. In a sense, it's all quasi-religious. In the language of cinema and in the text of the film, there is divine authority, and so a deus ex machina, even in a slight degree, is not a fault. So, are the eagles a deus ex machina? Well, it depends on what you mean. In a sense, yes, and in a sense, no. I'd err on the side of saying that it's a case of an acceptable real or true deus ex machina. Is it a fault with the text? I'd have to say emphatically no. That's all for me today, folks. Thank you all for watching. This essay was originally produced for my patrons over at Patreon, so if you liked this and enjoyed what I do, head over there and consider supporting me directly. If you liked this video in particular, feel free to give it a like, share it around, and leave a comment telling me what you think. Until next time, fly, you fools.